Have you ever wondered what the difference between man and animals are? I have never been it's going to sound bad, I'm going to make people not like me, huge animal fan. I actually do love cats and dogs. I'm like super allergic though, so as soon as I get around cats and dogs and dust, excuse me, strangely enough, I blow up like a balloon in my nasal area, can't breathe, and asthma all of a sudden starts kicking in, and lots of fun stuff. But animals are, they're really cool. Like I love dogs. I love playing catch with a dog and petting a cat. And God's obviously given us animals to work, to take care of, to use for profit, to use for gain. And yet there's an aspect where we know there's a difference between us and them. We know that God has somehow put something different between the two of us. And there's this immaterial really difference between the two of us. And there's so much in today's passage that we could talk about when it comes to the difference between man and animal. That's not what we're going to do, because that's not the point of this, of Solomon here. That's not really the point of the author, what he wants to communicate. But it is really interesting to notice that as far as man and animal, there's actually not that much of a difference that you can see. Okay, that's what I want to emphasize. There's not much of a difference between man and animal that you can see. And today we're just going to look at really how should man act in light of the fact that we're not that different from animals. How should we act? How should we live? And Solomon explains that let's see, what's this word I put here? Well, I have really bad handwriting. Worth. Okay, man's worth is immaterial, right? Man's worth is immaterial. Everything important about us is immaterial, and we should therefore rejoice in the work that God has for us. Solomon is really laying out this great work ethic for us to understand. It's been really encouraging for me to read. But anyway, hi, welcome to the Rooted Project. This is here to keep you rooted in Scripture and ready for life. And it might sound interesting that we're going to talk about human and animals, but it's in the text, and we're going through Ecclesiastes. So that's what we're going to do. And I just hope this has encouraged you. Happy Tuesday or Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, whenever you watch this, whenever I post it. I am still in Africa. And I am actually still in the place I recorded the last video in, because I don't know when I'm going to have Wi-Fi again, and I want to make sure I can get this posted. But it's still been really cool. My face is burning because I have a ton of bug spray on, and it's just like everything tingles. Anyway, that was too much information. Nobody actually cares. Let's get to the text. Okay, Ecclesiastes chapter 3 again, verse 16. Okay, so Solomon does this thing where he says, "I see under the sun." Or I see things. He talks about his observations, right? Just things he's observed. So in this little section here, I've kind of just picked out some observations that he observes, some deductions that he makes from those observations, and then two conclusions that he comes to. Okay, so we got observation, deduction, conclusion. We'll try to keep it short and sweet, super applicable. Okay, so verse 16, he says, "Moreover, I saw under the sun." So it's something that he's observed. I saw under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. And in the place of righteousness, iniquity was there. I said in my heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every work, purpose, and for every purpose, and every work. Okay, so that's kind of his first observation, right? Wickedness happens. Wickedness happens. He says, I saw that wickedness happens. Really, he says wickedness happens in the place where justice should happen. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. When you think about the place of judgment, think of like courts, rule of law, those areas. He says where justice is supposed to be served, there's actually wickedness. Okay, we think of courts, or probably even think of like stores where things are with inflation, with all these different things, numbers are rising, but then sometimes stores kind of artificially inflate some of their prices, and the scales are unbalanced from what they really should be, and there's injustice there. There's injustice in government, okay, not just in like court of law, not even just like courts where you're solving civil disputes, but just like the government as a whole. There's injustice there, and Solomon says, I've observed this, that there is injustice. And it's like, oh, well, Solomon, I got bad news. It doesn't really get any better. There's still so much injustice that happens today, even in the places where justice is supposed to happen. And he also says where righteousness should happen, there is iniquity or sin, and so the places where righteousness should be taught, should be learned, there is iniquity. And man, that's so true. I think about churches, the amount of sin that is in churches, even though those are places where righteousness is supposed to be taught and supposed to be known, the gossip, the infighting, the sexual immorality, the doctrinal errors, the taking God's truth and twisting it to really fit your own desires, and maybe even schools, right? Schools were a place where righteousness should be taught and should be known. Truth should be laid out before us. Schools are a place where iniquity is instead sown into the hearts of men and told to be okay. It's where they switch things around, where they say what's right is wrong and what's wrong is right. And so Solomon here is saying, I've observed this, okay? I've observed that where good things are supposed to be done, wrong things are actually done. And this was his deduction, okay? He makes this, he says, I saw, and then he says, I said. Okay, I saw this and I said this in my heart. He said, God judges everyone. God judges the righteous and the wicked. And that's his deduction. Everyone will face judgment. Okay, we think of the great white throne judgment in the future. We think of the death and hell be cast into the lake of fire, that eternal judgment. Okay, and a lot of times we often think of judgment as something for unbelievers. Well, you're going to be judged and you're going to be sent to hell. But the reality is, I want to say it's 2 Corinthians 6. I should have looked it up before I started recording this. But believers, the righteous, will also be judged. And it's not a judgment of condemnation versus acceptance, but it's a judgment of our gifts, of what we have done with the talents we've received. Jesus uses that illustration, that parable in the Gospels. He talks about the person who was given talents to use, and he squandered them. He didn't use them in the right way, and ultimately he was judged. And so all of us, righteous and unrighteous, will be judged for how we act on earth. And he says, for there's a time for every purpose and every work. I think my mind goes a couple ways in this. He could mean that there's a time for every person to act a certain way. I'm not super happy with that, the way that works in my mind. But I do think, and I think this could be confident, and really no matter how you take this, is that there's a time for every work. There's a time to be judged. Okay, he's talking about how everyone's going to be judged, and there is a time, there's a purpose for every work. God is going to judge. That time is coming. That purpose is coming. He will judge you for what you've done. So, man, are you being just in the places you're supposed to be just? Are you doing justice in places where people aren't doing justice to you? Right? How are you living? How are we living? It was a rebuke to me to think about this, because sometimes we're going to use those aspects to our advantage. Right? I don't always do things just and perfect. There's a lot of times where there's an opportunity to make things work out for me, and it's like, it's really tempting to do. And so are we being just in the places that justice should be done? And are we being just in even the places, are we being righteous in the places righteousness should be done? Are we being righteous? Are we doing what we're supposed to do? The reality is, Solomon says, not everybody does. The world doesn't always work like that. Then he says in verse 18, I said in my heart. Okay, so we have observation, and we have deduction, and now we have deduction number 2, okay? He says, I said in my heart, I said, concerning the conditions of the Son of Man, that God tests them, that they will see that they themselves are like animals. Okay, so here's where we're getting to the answer of where we started. That we are like animals. God tests them so they can see that they're like animals. Verse 19, for what happens to the Son of Man also happens to animals. One thing befalls them, as one dies, so dies the other. Okay, so animals die. The things that happen to animals happen to humans. So there's a flood, animals are affected, and humans are affected. If there's disease, animals are affected, humans are affected. If there's drought, animals are affected, humans are affected. If there's death, okay, he says this, if there's death, both animals and humans face the same thing. They die. Man has no advantage over animals. Oh wait, sorry, I skipped the part. Surely they all have one breath. Man has no advantage over animals, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and all return to dust, right? We all have been created by God. We have all come from the dust of the earth. We've all been created by him, and we will all go right back to where we came from. We will all die. Who knows the spirit of the sons of men, which goes upward, and the spirit of the animals, which goes down to the earth? So I perceive that nothing is better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his heritage. Okay? And so that's what he says right there. He says, who knows the spirit of man? Who knows it, right? It's unknowable. The spirit of man that goes up and the spirit of animal that goes down, and there's a lot of things we could get into there, and I don't have time. I'm already almost we're almost have to cut it short. Okay, and so but the point is, who knows the spirit of man? You can't see it. Man's value is intrinsically immaterial. It is without form. Man dies. Animal dies. Man works, animal works, so on and so forth. And so our worth is something that's immaterial. It can't be seen. It can't be seen. So those are the two things he sees, he says, and this is really the deduction he makes, or maybe one of the conclusions. I'll say the conclusion. Okay, so we have observation, deduction. Conclusion number 1, so rejoice in your work, since that is your physical value. So I perceive that nothing is better that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his heritage. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? There's no reason to stress about what's going to happen after you. Rejoice in your works. Really, that is our value as humans, physically. Okay, we have spiritual souls that are accountable to Christ, souls that will be judged, as we've talked about. Okay, animals face injustice too, and all of those different things. And so the answer is not to fret, not to toil, but to rejoice in the gift that God has given you of work, of material value, of something that is physically, tangibly useful for other people and for yourself, okay? Let's keep going into verse 3, because he has another conclusion that's related to this, okay? He says, then, in verse 4, okay, I returned, verse 4, chapter 4, verse 1. Then I returned and considered all of the oppression that is done under the sun. So we talked about oppression. He makes some observations and conclusions. Then he goes back to that thought of oppression. He considers it that is done under the sun. And look, the tears of the oppressed but they have no comforter. On the side of the oppressors there is power, but they have no comforter. Therefore I praise the dead who are already dead, more than the living who are still alive. Yet better than both is he who never existed, who has not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. And so his second conclusion is that oppression is unending. It is something that will continue for forever. He actually even goes to the point of saying in this emphatic nature, it's better to die. It's better to have never existed than to experience oppression. Now, that's not saying to go commit suicide. That's not saying to stop having kids, right? The Bible, we're called to be fruitful and multiply. But it is a call to recognize that God has given us material value, and that oppression will always happen oppression will always happen no matter what we do, no matter what material value we try to earn. Because really our true value is immaterial. That's what I was trying to say. Our true value is immaterial. Oppression will always happen. And happens to the point that it'd be better if he never existed. And so the answer is, what do? We continue to fear God. We continue to enjoy him. And we continue to enjoy the works, to rejoice in the works that he has given us. Okay? So, live righteously, right? Don't oppress others. And when oppression comes, don't be surprised. Enjoy the material worth God has given you because of the immaterial worth that you truly are. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed. Stay rooted in Scripture and ready for life. Bye.